And presenting on behalf of the company is Kyle Flood, President and CEO. Go ahead, Kyle.
Thanks, Derek. And thanks everyone for tuning in today. It's a pleasure to be with you. VOX Royalty Corp is one of the fastest growing royalty companies on the planet. And we have significant competitive advantages that we unlock to achieve that growth. We have built intellectual property that leads the space in that category. We have unique deal sourcing relationships around the world and a highly technical team that underpins our ability to understand the quality of the assets and the quality of the transaction and the value that we're achieving for our shareholders. Our team evaluates opportunities on a very disciplined basis. When we talk about accretive opportunities, we talk about being accretive on both a NAV basis and a cash flow multiple basis, and the absolute return on investment that we expect to achieve. A lot of royalty companies these days talk about accretive transactions, but don't actually practice what accretion actually means in this sector. VOX has led the industry in growth, and it's not just growth for the sake of growth. Our transactions are disciplined, our capital allocation is very tight to quality of asset and quality of transaction and quality of growth of that asset. So we've led the industry in growth, but it is at deeply accretive valuations. Our portfolio, we've achieved critical mass. We now have over 47 royalties and streams, and the organic growth is clear within the portfolio. We have over 32,000 meters of partner-funded drilling each quarter as embedded growth in that portfolio that we pay nothing for. We have very low geopolitical risk and a first mover advantage in the Australian marketplace, with now we're the second largest holder of hard rock mining royalties in Australia to Franco-Nevada at 31. We're focused on precious metals. That being said, we're able to drive significant value for our shareholders by looking at interesting hard rock assets in the battery metal space and base metal space, such as copper, when we can find great assets at great valuations and bring those into the portfolio for our shareholders. And we have the deepest pipeline of very accretive and significantly accretive transactions of any royalty company out there today. Quick recap on VOX's cap structure. We went public in May of last year. We raised approximately 14 million Canadian in that first initial public offering. We have no debt and a very clean and tight capital structure. We're a precious metals weighted portfolio with about 70% of our NAV attached to precious metals. 2022 revenue expectations is about 80% gold revenue. Low geopolitical risk, as I've mentioned, with that very significant advantage in Western Australia. And rapid growth organically in the producing asset count. We went public with 1 production stage asset. We now sit at 4. We expect to be at 6 with just pure operator guidance. And we expect in 2023 to be approaching 10 plus production stage assets. Quick background of the team, very technical in nature. This company was founded back in 2013, 2014, and we set out to build one of the best teams in the industry centered around technical expertise. Simon Cooper is both a mining engineer and geologist. Spencer Cole is a mining engineer. Rand Nusser, who's a renowned geologist. And we bring many, many years, in fact, more than 30 years of combined expertise in transacting and valuing royalty opportunities. We have a global footprint. Our portfolio is around the world at this stage. We have a very significant exposure to what we believe and what most independent rating agencies also believe is the best mining jurisdiction on the planet, which is Western Australia. We continue to build on that competitive advantage in that jurisdiction, and we're bringing great royalties at great value to the table for our investors. As I mentioned, our producing asset count is expected to continue to increase exponentially. Our development stage assets are moving ahead of schedule, and our exploration assets have a tremendous amount of drilling on these assets as they continue to move into that development stage. Quickly, we have a host of interesting assets. We are very disciplined in what we call development stage. Those are assets that have either produced a feasibility study or are in the midst of producing a feasibility study. Interesting assets in that stage. Bowdens is the largest developing primary silver project in all of Australia. We're very excited about that royalty. It is moving into feasibility. It is deep into the permitting process, and we are excited about what that asset has in store for VOX shareholders over the coming years. Lynn Lake was a recent acquisition. That's being advanced by Alamos. We have a royalty over part of the McClellan deposit, and we expect that to be having a production decision either later this year or early next year. As mentioned, VOX has been the fastest growing royalty company in the royalty sector since the start of 2019, far outpacing the growth of any other royalty company. But it's not growth for the sake of growth. It's growth because we have that quantum of quality opportunities that we evaluate on a daily basis. We're finding highly accretive opportunities in volume that frankly is unprecedented in the royalty sector. One of the reasons that we're able to deliver that growth at great value for our investors is that we invested in IP long before anybody thought about IP in the royalty space. We were both building it and acquired it. We paid $2.1 million for a company called Mineral Royalties Online that had built this proprietary database of 7,000 royalties based on first principles and primary data. They went into the exploration offices and mining cadastras around the world and partnered with them to find references to royalties and build that into a digitized data format overlaid with geospatial data so that we can understand where royalties were, are the reserves and resources and mining projects over those royalties, and also who the owners were. And then we've complemented that with a deal sourcing apparatus around the world to where we might know where a royalty is and the dimensions of that royalty, but we're also able to find the owner of that royalty. And being able to connect those dots is what unlocks so much value and so much growth for our shareholders and for our business. We've developed a world-class operating partner portfolio. And the nature of these operators is very significant in that having this quantum of disparate parties running our royalty-linked operations provides huge diversification for our portfolio and for our investors. But what we're finding is in this market where we've seen, especially with our exposure in Australia, all-time high gold prices in Australian dollar terms for the last few years running, most of these companies are extremely well capitalized and have been very well incentivized to move their projects ahead of the pace that they expected in terms of development. And so we're seeing unforecasted upside all the time in our portfolio because of the strength of the commodity cycle, especially in Western Australia. Very quickly, we're very grateful and thankful for the coverage that Red Cloud provides us on the research side. They do a great job covering our business for investors. And if you don't have those reports, please feel free to reach out to your Red Cloud representative. We're also covered by two other brokers, which we're appreciative for. Based on those analyst forecasts and valuations of VOX, we trade about a 0.9 times price to NAV. I get asked quite frequently, why do you trade not at the higher end of this range? And I think one of our greatest assets is also one of our most misunderstood assets, and that's our exposure in Western Australia. Western Australia is the best mining jurisdiction on the planet as far as we're concerned, and backed up by most independent rating agencies. Unfortunately, a lot of our investor base doesn't understand or doesn't know a lot of the Western Australian operators and those assets, and frankly, that jurisdiction as a whole. As I believe the market continues to build on its understanding and knowledge of Western Australia, much like Franco-Nevada was able to swoop up royalties early on in its growth cycle in the late 80s and 90s at great valuation in a great jurisdiction, we are executing a very similar strategy and growth profile in Western Australia. And at some stage, we believe that investors will appreciate that exposure and that should garner a premium valuation. So why VOX? Amidst so many royalty companies popping up every day, VOX offers you unprecedented growth in the royalty sector and unprecedented organic growth within the portfolio already today. With more than 40 operating partners and 32,000 meters of operator-funded drilling, we're producing organic news flow on a weekly basis that's truly increasing the organic and absolute value of our portfolio. We have a tremendous amount of growth also in production. We went from 1 production stage asset to 4. We expect to end this year with much more than 6 in terms of producing assets. And that's driving what is and what will be very significant revenue and cash flow growth. We believe this is an opportune time to be investing in VOX. We're very excited about what the future holds for this business and appreciate you tuning in today. And Derek, I will hand it over to you for Q&A.
Sure. Thanks, Kyle. I think maybe as a first step on it, you went through the overview of the business and the transition. Maybe for investors, talk a little bit about some of those royalties that are maybe are going to be new to cash flowing this year in 2021, or and that you're expecting significant news from over 2021 and 2022. Where investors should be focusing in the portfolio on your vast portfolio.
Yeah, we're really excited about this year at a very tangible level, which I think the most tangible measure would be cash flow. Analysts, as you know, are expecting us to do about 2 million CAD in revs this year, going to 6, going to 8. What's generating that growth? Karora Resources. They're the operator of the Higginsville mill. We have 3 key deposits that feed that mill. We acquired that royalty mid last year. That asset's been growing exponentially in terms of revenue and is in production. And frankly, we weren't expecting that to be in production for up to 2 years, and it was in production just a couple months after we purchased it. So that's one of our production stage royalties. We also have the Browna Diamond Mine, which is the largest producing diamond mines in South America. So that is in production and generating revenue for the business. Koolje is in production as an iron ore royalty. There is a prepayment, but we expect that we will be in position to be receiving revenue from that this year. And then Segilola is a gold asset run by Thor Explorations. They're targeting second quarter for first gold pour. That on a run rate basis will do about $1.5 to $2 million a year in cash flow for us. A caveat, it is capped, but at the price we bought it at, we bought it about 0.25 times NAV. We should realize multiples on what we invested in that royalty before the cap ever hits. And then we have another production stage gold asset based on operator guidance, the Boolong Gold Asset in Western Australia. They have guided that they'll be in production in the fourth quarter this year. In fact, they just optioned a very significant gold mill. And then we have a host of other royalties that we expect to be in that kind of late 2022 to 2023 timeframe as well. So all in, we believe that we should be around 10 production stage assets by about mid 2022.
Right, and these are all, and just to clarify for investors, these are all assets that are in the portfolio that you've already paid for. There aren't additional, for the most part, there aren't significant additional payments outstanding on any of them.
Correct.
Now, on those ones, you talked about 5 or 6 there of the assets that are coming on. Maybe looking a little bit further down the pipeline, maybe the development stage assets that are a little bit earlier. Which one of those are really have caught are ones that you're focused on, thinking that that's where a lot of value can be added for VOX shareholders based on the work that's being done?
Yeah, I can talk about a few that I think are getting value, or at least understood, and then a couple that aren't. In terms of what it should be easier to understand, we have the royalty over the Bowden's silver project in Australia, which is the largest developing primary silver project in Oz. They've released, continue to build out that resource and release great drill results. They're kind of midway through the permitting process and feasibility. So that's a near term, call it the next couple of years opportunity, and that's a very significant long life cash flower that's primary silver exposure. Then, Derek, I think you're somewhat familiar with Kalamazoo. They purchased the Ashburton project from Northern Star. That's sitting at about a 1.6, 1.7 million ounce resource, more than around 2 grams per ton. They are drilling about 7,000 meters on that. We're going to have those results over the coming months, but they're expecting that they can bring that into about a 3 million ounce resource, maybe more. That becomes a very, very significant asset for us if you expect that to get, which is kind of what we're looking at, is north of 100,000 ounces a year of production when it gets to that point. Those are 2 assets over the next couple of years that are going to be really interesting as they develop. And then you have something like Pitombi-Aris, which is just released a maiden PEA and resource, but it's shaping up to be an absolute world-class vanadium project. As you know, we bought the Brits royalty, which is over Bushveld's project in South Africa, which is one of only 2 primary vanadium producers on the planet, and extremely high grade. We expect that to be in production over the next couple of years. So we have a really exciting portfolio. I could go on and talk about assets all day long that have significant catalysts in front of them and are going to drive immense value for our shareholders.
Yeah, no, it's a very deep portfolio from that perspective, and as you said, lots of news flow for VOX shareholders to see. I think the other part that's really interesting about VOX, and one of the reasons I like the company is that proprietary database that you guys have. Can you maybe talk a little bit about, um, what that looks like in a transaction and how you do it? Maybe a transaction that you've done in the last year or so, and how you use the database to actually, execute on that.
Yeah, there's certain transactions I'm bound by confidentiality that I can't talk about. We had, frankly, 5 assets. Our biggest competition is the operator. We had 5 royalty deals done under LOI that operators utilized their right of first refusal, preemptive right to buy. And so we've seen that happen, unfortunately, 5 times, but again, still led the industry in growth. I can talk to you about an example where, that didn't happen, where there wasn't a right of first refusal. But when we acquired the royalty over Karora's part of Karora's Higginsville operations, that was a 1992 royalty. I think Karora had forgotten about it. I think largely the rest of the world had forgotten about it. We found it and were able to buy that royalty at very good value and bring that into the portfolio. And that was essentially producing 2 months out from production. Gold. So we bought royalties from hearing aid companies that didn't know they owned royalties, to telecommunications companies within production iron ore royalties. So we're finding royalties under the radar and unknown about all over the world, from held by disparate parties, from mining majors to mining juniors, to prospectors and different types of businesses like hearing aid companies. So our ability to find transactions and royalties that others don't know about, I think at this point is obviously very evidenced.
Yeah. And then I guess one thing that we were talking about when we came on is that there are a lot of, before we came on, was that there's a lot of startup royalty companies right now, a lot of guys both competing for product and also competing for investor dollars. What sets you apart from some of those other companies, and why do you have a competitive advantage over them?
Frankly, we've been around since 2013, 2014. Our team's been operating in the royalty sector really each for the better part of the last decade. So we have nearly 40 years of combined expertise in royalties and acquiring royalties, where most of the startups, they don't have that. And I'll tell you, investing through cycles is very important. Seeing what seems like a very bullish cycle in 2011, 12, 13 switch into a very bearish cycle gives you really good perspective. But also just as important is we built competitive advantages during that period of time where this IP was being built. Our deal sourcing apparatus with tentacles around the world was being built. We are in play on more opportunities, which gives us the luxury of being extremely disciplined in what we buy and judicious with our capital. So we are growing faster than everybody. That's evidence of how many deals we have in front of us, but it's the discipline in what we're buying is probably what we're most focused on in terms of driving those accretive results for our shareholders.
Yeah. And a question from the audience. At what stage are you focused in exploration? Okay. Now that I've read the question, I'll rephrase it. What stage of company are you focused on, or what stage of royalty? And then also, what are you looking for in a lead time to development on a new acquisition?
So, usual lead time in terms of acquiring, from when we find the royalty in the database, do the diligence on it, that typically is about to closing. Those processes usually run about 3 months.
Right.
But in terms of what we focus on, I think that's a great question, because it's a real differentiator of VOX. We look for assets that are anywhere from, call it a day out of production to a couple of years out of production. And that's where we find the deepest value and, frankly, more opportunities. So we're able to be very disciplined in where we're allocating capital within that asset bracket in terms of development stage. And we really utilize our technical team to understand, are these assets going to come into production on time? Is there, what are the growth dimensions of these assets? And where are we finding really deep value? And so that's really where we focus. And you're seeing that happen in our portfolio. That organic growth is a function of finding more of those assets than anybody else in the market today.
Right, which is why you have such a such a steep growth curve on the revenue side.
Yep.
Going forward. I think with that, we're just about out of time, and the next presentation is about to start. So thank you, Kyle, for taking the time to present. I'd invite everyone to jump over to the keynote presentation at noon with Matt Watson, the Director of Precious Metals Commodity Management, LLC, and look forward to seeing you all there.